on June 24th, 2022, 15 months ago, his younger brother Christian was murdered in Chicago. Police determined that he was not the target of the shooting, but was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. And we have seen you, Mr. Caldwell, out there as an outspoken advocate for stopping this surge of violent crime we see across the country. We appreciate that work, and we appreciate you being here today. Mr. John Garrido III. Mr. Garrido served with the Chicago Police Department for more than 30 years, retiring as lieutenant in 2022. During his career, he worked in the patrol division, narcotics, violent crime, and homicide. We appreciate you being here today and the 30 years of service you gave this town and you gave to law enforcement. And finally, Mr. Carlos Yanez Jr. Mr. Yanez was shot several times in the head and shoulder during a traffic stop in August 2021 while serving as a Chicago police officer. Mr. Yanez's partner was tragically killed during this incident. After being shot, Yanez's doctors told him that he would never move the left side of his body again, but he regained movement after extensive physical therapy. We appreciate your service. We appreciate your perseverance and your dedication to overcoming the tragic shooting that you had to endure. We welcome all of our witnesses and thank them for appearing today. Please know that we have any written statements that you shared with us ahead of this forum. So accordingly, we ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes if you can, but we're going to be lenient with that. If you got to go 7, 8 minutes, you go right ahead. This is that important. And we're going to start with Mr. Caldwell and then work right down the line. So, Mr. Caldwell, you're recognized for whatever amount of time you want to take.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Jordan. Thank you, Chairman Biggs. And a special thank you to Congressman Burgess Owens, who's been working behind the scenes with me since last year to ensure that I can be before this body. My name is Gianno Caldwell. I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. I got involved in public service when I was 14 years old, working for my local alderman, because I actually believed my community in Chatham could be saved from violence, crime, and drugs. I eventually moved with the same goals in mind to Washington, D.C. and became a political consultant and a national media analyst and TV personality. Before I begin, I truly wish that it was not my place to be before you today. But I believe I have no choice. No choice because of the countless people in my hometown, including my own family, who are innocent victims of murder and violent crime. Those who are shot, robbed, carjacked, or even worse, those who've had multiple people in their family murdered in Chicago. Those voices scream out for justice. Many of the elected officials here in Chicago have ignored those voices, and it has come at a great price for the people of the city, not just in blood, but also in treasure and opportunity as multi-billion-dollar businesses like King Griffin Citadel justifiably fled Chicago. And he took millions of dollars in tax revenue with him. We know this has happened in due part to the policies of the Cook County prosecutor, Chicago's most recent mayors, the governor, other politicians throughout the state of Illinois. These officials have recklessly ignored the people they were elected to represent. And as a result, bodies, mostly black bodies, are littered throughout the streets of Chicago. I unfortunately understand the pain of thousands of victims whose families have been destroyed. On June 24th of last year, I received a call that my innocent teenage baby brother Christian had been murdered, shot down in the street by a stranger when a group of men stepped out of a black SUV and fired into a crowd on 114 South Vincent Street. The police have repeatedly said that my brother was not the target, that he just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. But in Chicago, being at the wrong place at the wrong time could be sleeping in your bed and a bullet comes through your window, or in the backseat of a car at a McDonald's drive-thru as 7-year-old Jocelyn Adams was murdered. Living in Chicago should not come with a death sentence, but it does for too many Chicagoans. My brother Christian had the potential to do well in life. I still remember the day when he begged me to take him on a college tour out of state when he was just 16 years old. And we went. But Christian will never have the opportunity to go to college or to get married or to have kids or to build a career. And so many other youth in Chicago have experienced the same reality. I refuse to capitulate to the idea that Christian had just become another Chicago statistic, one of the hundreds of homicides in Chicago in 2022. There's an abundance of potential in Chicago among our youth and old alike. Unfortunately, much of that potential lies in graveyards across our city. Chicago recently had the highest number of homicides in more than a quarter of a century. As of today, 2023, it is on pace to join the previous 2 years as one of the most violent years in our city's history. From the moment I learned my brother Christian was murdered, I felt defeated. Since my younger sister Mia called me on June 24th screaming into the phone, "Christian is gone," I felt a giant void in my heart. Never had I made room for the thought or possibility that someone so close to my life would be so stolen so violently. But that's naive, I suppose. On the same day my brother was killed, a 5-month-old girl by the name of Cicely was murdered in a drive-by shooting while sitting in the backseat of a car with her family. Chicago is an active war zone. This is not hyperbole. It's the people who are afraid to leave their homes, to walk to and from work, to walk anywhere in this city. Would this same fear, would these same murders be accepted in the suburbs? Absolutely not. The soft on crime policies that many of you know about here are prosecutors like Kim Fox, who refuses to prosecute, decriminalization of offenses, laws like the Safety Act, which ends cash bail and allow criminals back on the street to commit more crime, and the no chase policy, which constrains the police from doing their jobs. Policies pushed by the Cook County prosecutor and current and previous mayors have proved to be a death sentence for the people of the city of Chicago. What started off as perhaps a noble cause for criminal justice reform has become justice for the criminal. It is our police who have been handcuffed, as criminals no longer live in fear of arrest or prosecution. When you can steal at will, when you can drive away from a police stop, the streets become lawless. Murder, as many like my family know too well, is close behind. The elected officials here have systematically endangered the lives of all Chicagoans, but especially those of color, the marginalized who they claim to care about the most. Most shot and murdered in Chicago are black men. According to the Chicago police, African Americans, including my brother, made up of 80% of the murder victims in Chicago in 2022. For the record, black people make up only 29% of the city's population. We need help. Congress must use the power of the purse to place restrictions on the funding received by local governments to ensure elected officials are focused on what should be their #1 priority, the protection of its citizens. Federal dollars are used effectively for natural disasters from storms to pandemics. It's time to use those same resources for man-made disasters. Providing funding for local law enforcement agencies to help hire, train more officers with the latest crime-fighting techniques, support programs that address the root cause of crime, job training, education, and other social services to help people at at-risk communities. As small as it sounds, the federal government can help provide some special funding for funerals, as innocent people being killed are those who need such help the most. Let the world know how many are buried in our communities here. Pass legislation that supports community policing, which emphasizes building much-needed relationships between law enforcement officers and the communities they serve. The First Step Act, a law that I lobby for personally, provides funding for programs that help people who have been incarcerated successfully reintegrate into society. Congress could increase funding for the Second Chance Act to help reduce recidivism rates. Finally, Congress and the federal government should employ the full use of the FBI to help clear out murder cases in our cities. When I first spoke to the detective handling my brother's case, he told me he had other priorities and more cases had come in since my brother was murdered. I've since been told Chicago alone needs 2,000 new detectives to handle the current caseload. It wasn't until I angrily went on Chicago and national media that the detective took me seriously. I had access to a platform most families do not. Even then, it didn't last long. Soon, police weren't returning my calls. And they weren't, even though there's been someone arrested, my brother's murder has not yet been solved. Ultimately, I believe the Chicago Police Department have failed my family and countless others. Reforms within the Chicago Police Department are needed. I've had to go through hell in an attempt to get justice for my brother. I'm now working directly with the FBI Chicago field office. How many of the hundreds of murderers have that same opportunity? My love for Chicago is infinite and unconditional. It will always be home to me. I first got involved in public service when I was just 14, volunteering for my local alderman every day after school like it was a job. A decision which set me on a path to public service to help a city I love so much. But my family and no family should go through what I've experienced this past year. We have more resources than any nation in history. Why aren't we using those resources for people who need them most? Why are we allowing our cities, from Chicago to New York, to Los Angeles, to Baltimore, to Oakland, to Philadelphia, to San Francisco, to remain dangerous kill zones? While migrants are traveling from across the world to Chicago for a sanctuary city status, there continues to be no sanctuary and no peace for the very people who call Chicago home their entire lives. Today I'm here to demand justice and accountability, not just for my baby brother, but the thousands of other Chicagoans whom we may never know their names. I implore you to exercise your full power and resources. Christian's death is senseless. It's a senseless loss, but it doesn't have to be a meaningless one. Please make him one of our last victims and help us save the people of Chicago. Thank you.
Thank you. Well done.